Hello everyone! As a heads up, this episode has been divided into 2 parts. You are now listening to part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, please go back and do so before continuing forward. We hope you enjoy. Okay, so we'll kind of run through a few things that happen in succession, especially with Thor's story. There's only a couple things that I feel like really have an impact on the agency part. It's honestly with Loki at this point too. So anyway, we see that Thor ends up, he tries to get Jane to take him to where the hammer is, and she won't because Eric's like, probably don't. He seems a little weird.
That's a really big, crazy guy.
It's very fair. It's very fair.
Eric is awesome.
Yes,
he's such a good protector, mentor figure.
Yes, he is. He's really good person. So, but then Jane's stuff ends up getting taken by S.H.I.E.L.D., who has shown up to study the hammer and figure out what's going on with it, and nobody can lift it and all this jazz. So he finds out somehow they find out about Jane's research because they're S.H.I.E.L.D. and they can find things out. And they end up taking it all away from her, and she's really upset. So she decides to go find Thor to take him up on his offer he basically offered to explain everything about the storms and stuff they're studying, basically about Heimdall's rainbow bridge that he creates is what they're asking about. And he intends to tell her once she helps him get this hammer, and so she goes off to try to find him. Well, we also have another scene with Loki where he's taken the throne since Odin's fallen asleep, which is his right as the only son there, to be honest. And Thor's friends they're kind of discussing, we gotta get Thor back, which I honestly don't agree with them. I honestly think it's good that Odin sent Thor away, and they're being good friends, being worried about him and stuff, but they're concerned about that. And Loki's taken the throne, and he's like, no, I'm not going to bring Thor back. I'm not going to have my first move as king be to undo what my dad just did, which is coming from the wrong intentions because he just doesn't want Thor back. But again, he's also not wrong to make that decision, because it's true. He's not going to undo what Odin just did just because now he's king now and he can do whatever he wants, while Odin's out or whatever. And so it's kind of
it's kind of like Thor's decision. Well, we were talking about Thor's decision to go to Jotunheim. He ostensibly wanted to find out what's going on and protect his world, but really he wanted to go and start a war, right? It's that maybe good idea with the bad intentions.
Yes.
And, same thing. Really, he just wants Thor banished so that he can be king.
He wants
but on the surface, it is right. It is the right thing. He doesn't recognize that Odin had an ulterior motive for sending Thor away.
Yes.
And that Thor, through this experience, is actually going to become worthy of the throne.
Yes.
But
that Odin actually knew that Thor had the potential to change, and that this could really do something for him. But he's not in the wrong. And I think it's one of those moments, this is such a weird connection.
Okay.
But it just explains how my brain came to this conclusion about this whole situation. So Karian and I have been watching Downton Abbey.
Have we?
Yeah, well, it's been a minute.
Yes, we have. That was a joke.
We have been watching it. And I mentioned this is a rewatch for me after several watches. I've watched it a few times. And the character of Cora, the mother in this family in Downton Abbey, she's super interesting to me because she seems kind of in the dark a lot of the time. But also, I feel like she's the type of person that she takes what's right in front of her, the facts of things, and doesn't make assumptions based on circumstantial evidence, basically. She takes the facts that she sees and runs with that, and I actually really respect that of her. She's not a biased or prejudiced person at all. She sees, these are the facts, this is how we should deal with it, instead of being oh, well, I know this and this about this person from the past, and so she's willing to let people change, basically. And sometimes it causes her to make maybe not as great decisions. When we're watching it, we're we know this person is a terrible person.
That's actually a bad person.
Yes. You don't actually want them in your house. But I respect that where she's coming from with the knowledge she has, she works with that that, and it's understandable why she makes the decisions she does, because that's what she knows, and she's like letting people change and giving people opportunities. And I think Thor's friends are very much not doing that. With the facts that are in front of them, they honestly should think Loki's right. And maybe it's just like a movie maker thing, like they're trying to get you to be like, Thor's the good guy, Loki's the bad guy, and all the friends are like have that intuition, and they just know that like Thor is the good guy and Loki's the bad guy. But I'm like, based on what they know, honestly, they probably shouldn't be so like immediately not trusting Loki. I don't know. And we don't see how they grow up and stuff. And so maybe there's more history there that we just don't know about. But I feel like I watch it and I'm like, I mean, they were uncomfortable with what Thor was doing. Yeah. And Loki was the one that was the voice of reason amongst all of it. And honestly, Loki has a right to take the throne when Odin's
they
out.
Respect and love Odin.
Yeah.
Like that's their level of respect for the king is very clear when they all bow and kind of, I mean, what's the word that I'm looking for? I don't know. Like they immediately, bow and give Loki the respect as king. And Odin is obviously making decisions that they're uncomfortable with going against. So why suddenly?
Why is this one thing with Thor? It just makes me question. I'm like, you prefer Thor over everybody else? Because even Odin, who like did make that decision, and Loki is right in saying, I can't undo what Odin just did. Like as my first rule as king, that's not very respectful to him. And so especially when he could wake up anytime. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it is just movie makers wanting you, but you can also put in your own thought process of, I can understand why Loki's just doing what he's doing when he even in this, we see how alone he is. Like he's so on the outside of all of this.
He's making the right decisions.
Yep.
They do, just to speak to your comment about how like I wish that we could see more of the like growing up process for sure, for the context of this conversation to understand them better. But they do make comments about Loki lying. Thor like says, you've always been a really good liar and stuff like that. That's not his exact quote, but but they make comments like that. And one of the friends makes a comment about magic usage as well that sounds kind of derogatory. And so it sounds like there's maybe less, especially among this warrior crowd. Like I definitely get the sense that this like brute force and strength and weaponry, they value it more than somebody who kind of like hides in corners and makes himself disappear. And if you look at it from that perspective, it feels very cowardly, and that's not something that they're going to have any respect for. So I definitely get the sense from them that there is kind of this lack of trust. Like they recognize his cunning and his manipulation to some level. And if you're a warrior in the field with a coward, that's you don't want that because you can't trust them, right? You don't trust that person to have your back, to be there when you need them. And so I can kind of see that background of a lack of trust in him and believing that he'll actually like back them up and make the right decision. Yeah,
I could see that. But I will say with that though, I never get the feeling that they should jump to the conclusion that he would be that bad.
For sure.
Like I feel like they just kind of like jump to that conclude really quick, and I'm like, what?
That he would be willing to keep Thor banished for his own political for ambitions,
his own gain, or like that he would be willing to betray Asgard. Like they talk about like the Laufey mentions that there was a traitor within,
and they immediately
Odin's house, and they immediately are like, oh, they said a traitor, like it could be Loki. And I'm like, why would you like assume it was either Thor or Loki? Like why wouldn't you assume it was like a servant or someone? Like I don't know. I'm like, it could have been literally anybody, and you like jump to Loki. Like that's a pretty big, like they even say like he's always been one for mischief, but this is a whole other thing entirely. But then they pretty much like get on the bad wagon really quickly. Anyway, it's just their relationship with him is really interesting, and I think it's actually kind of sad that he's in that position where, and especially when you brought up the magic thing, like it could be seen as cowardly, but it's like he also learned it from his mom. And like it's almost treated as, oh, it's like a lesser thing, or they don't understand it, so it scares them.
So scary.
And so when they're fighting and like he creates a mirror image of himself to trick the guy into falling off the cliff, that would not be the way they would have handled it. And
Right.
it's just like creepy and weird. And so they're like, oh my gosh, like it automatically gives the feeling of untrustworthy because he's doing something to trick someone instead of just like attacking them.
Right.
And so I'm sure part of it is he's mischievous and a good liar, but also I think even though he's actually doing good things with the abilities he has and like actually fighting and facing up and stuff, just in the way that works for him,
for sure,
to them they're like, oh, that's kind of creepy and weird. What if he did something like that to me?
Yeah.
Even if he hasn't, that's just a thought that crosses their minds, and then they just don't trust him.
Yeah.
So
No, definitely. I think it very much just doesn't line up with what they value and how they see the world and things. And I think that that's really the only thing that makes sense to me that's created that foundation of a lack of trust where they would potentially jump to that kind of conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that just connecting it back to agency, it's interesting how, like you mentioned earlier, the labels we give people or the things we choose to believe about someone just based on very little evidence, if we let those beliefs carry us on, it can really impact someone else and how they feel and who they become, and can honestly impact their ability to use their agency, because if you keep forcing them into the same box, they're going to get tired of fighting that after a while.
Exactly.
So
yeah, like I said before about like we still have a responsibility on some level to help others use their agency wisely.
Yep.
So I have another scripture that I want to apply here to Thor, and then I want to apply it to Loki later. Hopefully I remember. At the very, very end. You can help me. Like the very, very end. If you can help me remember. So Mosiah 2:21 says, "Ye should serve him who has created you from the beginning and is preserving you from day to day by lending you breath, that ye may live and move and do according to your own will, and even supporting you from one moment to another." Okay, so the way that I think this is interesting with Loki choosing to keep Thor banished, which plays into Odin's ultimate plan, kind of going back to that idea, right? This word preserving caught my eye because Loki could have made a few different decisions at this point. He could have chosen to bring Thor back, which would have gone against like his ambitions, because then Thor would have been able to take the throne. But like there are different ways that he could have handled the situation. He could have sent the destroyer in to kill Thor right away, right? But he decides to just kind of leave things as they are. And I like this idea of God preserving us and supporting us so that we can do our will, because it's the fact that Loki makes the decision, maybe even is inspired to make the decision for the ultimate good of Asgard, for what needed to happen, of just kind of letting Thor go. It gives Thor that opportunity to use his agency in order to change and become better and come back as the person he needs to be. And so kind of with the friends like wanting to change that, like they're kind of going against this plan of like what Thor actually needs to become who he needs to become. And they don't understand that like God does what he needs to, right? And sometimes, and you know, if the friends are maybe, you know, sometimes we're led to intervene in things to also do good and to do what we need to, but they're trying to interfere in a plan that's supposed to play out. And I just think it's really, really interesting that through Loki's decision, the ultimate plan that needs to happen is able to be enacted because Thor is given time and given the strength that he needs to become.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Sorry if that got repetitive.
No,
but
that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. That if Loki was going to misuse his agency, God was still going to allow Thor to also choose how to use his own agency.
Yeah.
And give that option to both of them.
Right. And God is working through Loki's poor decisions, even. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Loki's able to use his agency, but God's not going to let that interfere in our own personal plans, right?
Yes.
Other people's agency can affect us, but he's never going to let that take away our potential to become who he wants us to become.
Yes.
We can use our agency through the decision, in spite of whatever the decision of others, to become what God wants us to become.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Anyway.
That's great. No, that's really good. So then we return back to Thor and Jane on Earth, and they go to get the hammer, and Thor breaks into this highly secure area. He beats up a whole bunch of people. We meet Hawkeye for the first time as he's taking aim. Yes, it's really great. And he's like, you need to tell me to shoot him soon because I'm starting to root for this guy.
I literally love that line so much. And Jeremy Renner's delivery is so spot on.
So
he's like,
good.
I'm starting to root for this guy.
You better call
You just get
it.
this like, man, I'm not gonna lie, this guy's pretty sweet.
This is pretty dope. And he clearly really wants this thing, whatever it is. So let's let him in. Anyway, so he busts in, he makes it, and Coulson ends up being like, no, I actually want to see what happens. And so he gets in and he tries to get the hammer to... He doesn't even try to lift it. Yeah, at first he just reaches for it because he's used to it just coming to him. And it doesn't. And I mean, oh man, you could make all sort of analogies with that of your just instinct to reach for something that you assume is going to be there, and it just doesn't come the way it always used to. And that's because there's things you need to learn and you're ready for more knowledge, and that's why
that's a whole other spiritual discussion. We could do a whole other episode on the idea of God removing himself and us feeling abandoned for our own good.
For our own good. Yep. So that's where he's at right now. And he just, it's really sad to see how fast he shuts down. Yeah. And it also, I think it's such a humbling moment for him, not just in the fact that he can't lift it, but also I'm sure part of him is realizing like, wow, maybe it shouldn't be that important to me. Like, I should not be crumbling because I can't pick up this hammer.
I think it removes a lot of his sense of worth and value, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think it also puts in perspective where he was putting his value.
Right.
And I think that's a lesson he continues to learn throughout his series, throughout his journey.
I don't think he
we
picks
see
that
that in the
thing
third
up in
one a lot as well, and we can maybe talk about it then. But we see definitely this very humbling moment. He ends up getting taken to an interrogation room. Briefly, we see Loki and his mom talking, and his mom basically makes a comment like, your dad does things for a reason, and that includes sending Thor away. Like, he wasn't just doing that out of anger. Like, he had a reason for it, and that makes Loki think, oh shoot, does that mean Thor could come back?
Right. And so then we start to connect this humility to like what Odin is actually trying to do.
Exactly, yep. And so we see Loki, so Coulson leaves the room and Loki makes himself appear, his like projection, whatever, appear to Thor to talk to him, and
Loki's like, I gotta do something to crush this guy.
Exactly. So he tells Thor basically that Odin's dead and that his mom does not want him back, and that
because it's Thor's fault.
Yes, because it's Thor's fault. Like, she blames Thor, and Loki has taken the throne, and he's like, part of the treaty with Jotunheim is that we don't bring you back either. So he has all these reasons to convince Thor not to even
Thor's
try.
line when he first asks, it's the most, that's where you're like, this man has been humbled, where he just says, can I come home?
Yes.
And you're like, he does not care about being king. He does not care about like this relationship. He does not care about who's better or stronger. He does not care. He wants to go home.
Yes. He's like, great, you're my brother and you're in power now. Okay, can you just let me come home?
Then can I come home?
That's all.
You're more powerful than me. That's okay. Just
whatever. We'll take it. But yeah, Loki doesn't want him back, and so he makes up this stuff, and the way Thor takes it also shows his humility. Is he's like, he's clearly really hurt by it, but he's also like, okay, like, I understand.
He gets it.
He's like, I understand why mom would be mad at me, and I understand I could be blamed for dad's death because I stressed him out too much, and
the treaty is really important.
The treaty is really important, and I recognize that now and value that lack of violence and stuff a little bit more and stuff. And then he's like, thank you for coming here. And you're like, Loki, why do you have to be so awful?
Why is this so painful?
It's and such I can a good see moment.
There's definitely an extreme shift there. So like I can definitely see your argument, but I think for me, the magnitude of the impact of not being able to pick up the hammer matches it. I think
Yes.
to me, they match well enough that it doesn't bother me, because his general personality and the way he acts isn't that different. He's been knocked down a peg. He's not as arrogant.
Yeah, and a little more reasonable.
Yeah, but I think he's reaching for something that's always been there, and what he's put everything that we just talked about, like, this is his value. This makes him powerful. This is the reason that he's going to be king. This is the reason all of his friends like him. This is the reason that he does everything he does. Like, it's his driving force in his entire life, and everything he's built his personality and his self-worth on, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to just it has to change everything. It changes everything. And so yeah, I can there are moments where I can admit, like, okay, the fact that he takes all of that so well is a little strange, but it's just an extreme enough situation.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's
Yeah.
not the thing.
That's not the
No,
thing.
It's
okay.
not the thing. That's actually
Okay.
the thing that saved it for me this time.
Got it.
I agree with you completely. Is
Yeah.
I was like, that makes sense. Like, it was this very humbling moment
Yeah.
that helped. I still think I wish I would have seen a little more time on Earth, even if it was like a weird montage thing where he's like hanging out with the others or something.
Okay.
Like, it would give me a little, like, he's literally there, it looks like, for like 3 days.
I think he is.
Like,
yeah.
I just feel like for an immortal, especially, 3 days is like that quick. I'm like, oh,
Thor's a passionate
I feel
guy,
he
though. He
is,
feels a lot.
but
He's
I'm
a
like,
fast mover.
he's also been alive for like a few thousand years,
Yeah.
and I'm like, 3
Yeah.
days was all it took for a 1,000-year-old man. I'm like, okay, what was he doing these whole 1,000 years?
Fighting and goofing off and drinking. That's the point. Nothing was
forced
ever
into
different.
it.
He never learned anything. He was only building his self-worth and
Yes.
value and sense of community and
Again, I
personality on
think this
one
moment is understandable why
Yes.
it does a lot for him.
Okay.
I just wish I could have seen more processing with it after,
Okay.
so that it just felt like he was actually processing it, and it wasn't just like
Snap
like
done.
completely he's a different person now,
Yeah.
or almost a different person. He's not completely different, like you said, but anyway.
See, but we see later what
yeah.
happens when Thor processes things, and it's really annoying because he gets a beer belly and shuts down and doesn't do
Was
anything.
he processing though? I would argue no.
No, you're right.
He was not actually
right.
processing.
I'm just
Anyway.
glad. I hate that later on in the
Oh,
movies when he
sorry.
gets like that. So maybe that's why it's easier for me to appreciate
But
the
yeah,
fact that he just moves
That's
on.
not the thing
Anyway,
that
okay.
bothers me.
Well, I'm excited.
So.
That was just what I was thinking.
Yes.
Because
it is
all
really
I knew,
abrupt.
all I knew was that, like, you had said that there's too abrupt of a shift, and so it's that moment that I'm like, but that explains a really abrupt personality shift.
Yes,
but
I
I'm
agree with
excited
that,
to
for sure.
see what else you have to say
For
about
sure.
it.
Because I think I hadn't seen this for a while, and so the thing that I was turning into the main reason why he changed was not quite in this, but then there's a comment made that acts like the thing I thought it was, and it annoys me. So we'll get
Okay,
there.
all
Okay,
right, we'll
anyway,
get there.
let's continue.
Okay.
So we see this whole interrogation. We see Loki talk to him, and then Eric decides to go get him out for Jane's sake. And so he pretends like Thor's name is, I don't even remember, some random doctor, and
Donald.
Yeah, Donald.
Something that
I'm
starts
so
with a
glad
B.
you remember that.
Donald
Good
B.
old Donald. So yeah,
I
so
think
he
I'm gonna
comes and
look it
gets
up.
him and is like, "Oh, you've ruined, like, he was part of our group and you took all our research away," and he was just really upset. They know he's faking it.
Yeah.
What is it?
Why do they let him go? Even
They
though
want to
know he's
follow
faking?
him
They
and
want-
figure
okay.
out
They just
what,
want to know what's going on.
get more information. that way.
Donald Blake.
Donald Blake, Dr. Blake.
I got as
There
far
you
as
are.
Donald B. Okay.
So there we are. So yeah, Eric is semi-successful, with air quotes around it, in getting Thor out of there, but they do send agents to follow him. We just kind of see them periodically throughout the rest. There's not really that much drama with that. But anyway, we see Eric and Thor talk, and they have a really good discussion, and Thor basically admits to being super humbled after everything. And I loved that one of the things Eric says is, he says, that's not a bad thing. Finding out you don't have all the answers, you start asking the right questions. And I think that really shows a huge shift in Thor's character. And that's a quote that I think stays with Thor throughout the movies, even though it's not necessarily quoted again. You see that he's constantly asking questions about what he's been taught and about his growing up experience and what it's like for Asgard and what being king really means, and whether he even wants to be king. And so it's really interesting that that quote is stated there. Eric also tells him that the best way to find a way in this world is to admit you don't know where you are and recognize you have all sorts of directions you could go in. Basically, if you don't know where you're at, then you choose which way to go and just try to figure it out from there. And this is giving Thor a chance where he's been raised to believe, like, I'm going to be king, and he's been taught all these glorious tales of their past and everything.
There's one path.
And now he's slowly starting to realize, I mean, Loki's realizing it more in this movie, that maybe his growing up and what he thought was true isn't so much. And Thor's getting a few hints of that in this. He gets more in the later movies for sure, but we start to see that he is in a position in this moment where he's having to choose a path and just try to figure out what direction he's going to start in from a place where he doesn't really understand actually where he is. And I think that's really interesting for his agency. It almost frees him up agency-wise. Like, he's been raised to be like, you are going to be king, and this is what you need to prepare for, and you're going to do. Whereas now this whole experience not only opened the doors to humbling himself, but also recognizing, like, maybe there are more things I could do, or more things I need to understand than what I thought I did.
Or be. I can be something different than I ever thought I could be. Yeah, because he's had, even beyond king, like, he's a warrior, right? But then suddenly his weapon is forced away from him, and so he has to reconcile the fact that maybe he can't be what he thought he was going to be anymore. Yeah. I'm also thinking about actually what you brought up with Downton Abbey.
Good. I'm so glad.
I'm wondering, and this is just me, like, thinking on the spot, so maybe you'll come up with something that it, like, doesn't add up, but I'm wondering if Thor almost is better at taking just the facts in front of him. Because, I mean, dealing...
I think Thor is, yeah.
You think Thor is?
I think Thor's friends aren't.
Thor's friends were struggling with it. But, I mean, taking the fact that he can't pick up the hammer, and just, even when we go to, like, the final battle and he says, I'm just a man, I'll just get in the way. That's a crazy hard thing for a guy like him to even speak aloud. Like, to just say those words. But that's the fact. The second he can't have the hammer, he just deals with the fact that he doesn't have the hammer. He doesn't even try to figure out how he can, like, get it back or figure out how to pick it up. Like, he doesn't think, Dad told me I'm not worthy. Maybe I could become worthy. Like, he just says, I can't pick up the hammer. I'm not going to. Which I would actually, you know, that's kind of... We could go into how that's a negative thing in that case, but... And then everything with Loki, his whole conversation with Loki, he just takes the facts and says, okay, you know, Loki's king, can I come home? No, I can't come home. Thank you for coming here. You know, thank you for providing me this moment of comfort. Even going to, he hears about the satellite, what the guys are calling the hammer when all of the random guys are out making sport of and trying to lift the hammer. Thor hears about it. He thinks, oh, that's got to be my hammer. Like, obviously, like, that's what they're talking about. And he says, where is it? And he says, 50 miles west of here. And Thor walks out of the cafe and they say, where are you going? And he's like, 50 miles west of here. Like, he's out. He's going. And then even leading all the way up to the end, every time he learns something new about Loki, he just takes it. He just, like, just whatever, when he gets to Earth, he just, like, goes about his business, deciding what to do next. He's like, okay, I'm on Earth now. Now I'm with these people. Now I'm here. And he just, and it's just whatever is happening, he just takes it and does it. And I feel like he doesn't make assumptions the same way everybody else does. Like, maybe he leans into that a little bit sometimes because it's, like, a normal thing to do. Because, you know, we should take previous knowledge to some level and apply it so that we can make intelligent decisions.
I feel like he's maybe a little bit leaning into a naivete about it.
Yeah, I mean, he's
but-
still naive for sure and doesn't understand everything. But I do think it's interesting, since you specifically brought that up with his friends, that he is very... And his relationship with Loki is really what makes me think of it. No matter what actions he sees Loki taking, it's just kind of like he's coming at it from a place of trust rather than distrust. He's like, he's my brother. He's never done anything like this before. I have no reason to think he would now, right? And he just kind of, it's not until he has the confirmation from his friends that Loki is really, that he believes
and
that
it's
Loki has lied to him.
No
or done
other choice.
anything
Like
wrong.
they are being attacked by Loki.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so yeah, that's just kind of an interesting connection to that to me, like the different personalities there of how they're reacting to things.
So then I'm not going to dwell too much on this because we've kind of discussed it already, but we see Loki, he goes to Jotunheim to talk with Laufey and admits that he's the one that let him in the first place. He makes a deal that they'll come in again and murder Odin in his sleep, and then Loki will be able to take the throne of Asgard and let the Frost Giants do whatever they want to do. That's the plan. And so we see a little bit of that. And then we get to the part that I don't like.
Okay.
I'm not anti it as a plot point. I'm anti it in the way it's presented, especially when, like I said, there's the one line that makes it a bigger deal than I feel like the movie actually portrays it. And that is the impact of his relationship with Jane. It makes it seem like because he spent time with Jane that had this huge impact on him. And honestly, all we see them talk about is we see them like being really attracted to each other and a little flirty. And then we see he sees that she really cares about her research. And then they like talk about the 9 realms.
Okay,
like
so you're referring
all we
to
see.
Loki asks, when did you go so soft? And he's like, don't tell me it was that woman. And he says it wasn't it? That's like
Yes.
the line that you're referring to? Okay, wait, hold up.
Because Thor is agreeing with him. That's why he doesn't say anything, because he's all like...
Yes.
see
Oh,
that.
no.
Yeah.
I agree that Thor is confirming, but I want to think more about the context of this conversation, because Thor is refusing to fight him. Loki's like trying to goad him on, and Thor's refusing to fight him, which is the humility and the change in his personality that they blame on Jane. And so you feel like in your memory of the movie, you also blamed it on Jane, but then watching the movie, you're like, no, it's this hammer moment. But then they blame it on Jane.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I was like, why have you gone so soft? Don't tell me it's because of that woman. And that was like all. And Thor's like, yeah, it was. And I was like, whatever. No, it wasn't. Because you had this moment with the hammer and you were humbled. And like Jane probably helped. I'm not saying Jane had no part in it. Okay.
Right.
I'm sure like seeing this woman who's on another planet and like how passionate in her emotions. But like, again, we don't actually see them having like, he has more of a connection on that level with Eric. His conversation with, not necessarily, I just mean the conversation before they got drunk, but
I think that's part of
they
it.
They had this connection of discussing his being humbled and thinking about his life in a new way and stuff that was really good with Eric. And then none of his conversations with Jane made me feel like he would actually be impacted like to that extent. I just think that I don't like that it's trying to make it like the romance where it like actually wasn't even that good of a romance. So yes, so they have their chat. The friends go and find him. He's making breakfast with her. It's so cute.
It's so cute.
It is really cute. And I'm like, I would have liked to see like a little montage of stuff like that where we just see him like living with them and doing that. Because then I could feel like, oh yeah, they've developed a relationship. I just don't feel like they give enough of any sort of sense of time for developing that relationship to make it give me the same connection I do for some of the other romances in Marvel. But that's all right. Like you said, Thor's humble enough to be like, I know I can't fight this, so I'm going to help get people to safety. That's what he's doing.
Epic.
But as his friends are slowly knocked down and stuff, he's like, no, like, you need to get away, whatever. I have a plan. But really, he doesn't. His plan is to, like, go in and take responsibility for his actions, basically, because he recognizes that some of the things he's done and said is has hurt Loki, and it's causing some of this to happen, and this hatred that is coming from Loki. He doesn't understand the full picture right now, obviously.
He's still pretty lost.
But he
figures this has to be my fault because he has nothing against Earth.
Yeah, exactly. He like knows, and he probably recognizes in their past like how alone Loki probably has felt, and that
as he's humbled and feels alone and isolated, he would start to think like, oh crap.
Have that empathy a little bit more. And so he apologizes in defense of the people and is like, look, I'll apologize, like take me, just leave these people alone, they're innocent and stuff. He ends up getting still attacked by the Destroyer, and he's like literally dying, and this is when Jane like is like, no, and like pushes Eric away and runs over to him and stuff, and I'm like, you've talked to him for like 8 hours of your life. And like she had
Tori,
a boyfriend
you just
before
gotta
this.
fall in love in 8 hours and then you'll understand.
With a god who's going to be like dying, and there's this big destroyer, and I'm just gonna like run out there even though I have no business being out there, and I'm surrounded by people who actually have power to do something about it, and I'm just gonna run out there and grab him and hold him.
If he's dying, then the Destroyer isn't going to come back. She's not in any danger.
I wouldn't take the chance. She doesn't know that. She doesn't know who the heck these people are.
She takes a lot more chances than you do as a rule.
Clearly. All right. Well, anyway, after our big long tangent that I don't know how much of it I kept in, we'll go on to... So Thor wins. He destroys the Destroyer.
Thor wins.
I think that's he wins this first fight. Coulson comes from S.H.I.E.L.D. and is like, oh, I don't think you've been honest with us. And then he's like, you got to give Jane back her stuff. And he said, fair enough. And then Thor goes, I don't know, I guess because they're in the middle of the town, but I was kind of like, why do you need to go back to the exact same place to get pulled in by Heimdall? But maybe I mean it's far, maybe he's just like, let's just get away from the town, and that just makes sense as a direction. I don't know. But anyway, he goes and calls to Heimdall to take him and his friends back so he can face Loki in person. And when he gets back, so the Frost Giants come in and they're going to kill Odin, and then Loki ends up betraying them and killing Laufey, again making himself look better. That again I think is his main plan, is every opportunity to, and it's just gotten more extreme with the more he knows. But
that I do think was premeditated, like from the time that he became king and made the deal with the Frost Giants. I think that was all kind of his ultimate to betray them.
Yes, I do agree. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. As far as that point of it,
I don't think at any point he actually felt sympathetic for the Frost Giants.
No, interesting. Which is interesting because basically he actually kills his own dad, biological father, literally, in that moment. He literally does, to save his adoptive father, which is just interesting. Like I feel like at this point his emotions are really disjointed, and he's very just like, he's losing power to his emotions more than he ever has before, and we don't see a lot of it. We see glimpses of how angry he really is, especially when he faces Thor and stuff, but we see like he chose his adoptive father over his biological father, so but yet he's still mad at his adopted father and still mad at Thor and wants to have that power. Like it's just this weird really mess of emotions for him right now. Like it's almost like he's trying to stick with his original, I just want to get rid of Thor, but he also still has this anger in him that's getting in the way, and so it's just all over the place. So anyway, then Thor ends up fighting Loki, and Loki's intent on destroying Jotunheim by making it so that the bridge is just constantly going and just beating on the planet, basically, is what it sounds like it's going to do, and it will destroy it. So he's sending it and making that happen, and Thor is fighting him, and then Thor ends up realizing he needs to destroy the bridge and disconnect it so that it won't destroy Jotunheim, which is amazing because it's all started with him wanting to destroy Jotunheim. Yeah. And really take over.
Literal
and be
180.
Even better than his dad by destroying the whole planet. And now he's like, oh, actually, I'm saving these people that I sought to destroy. Yeah. And who sought to destroy my dad and my family and stuff. And it's super interesting, this turnaround. Ultimately, the bridge breaks and Loki's about to fall, Thor's about to fall, and then Thor catches Loki and Odin wakes up and comes and catches Thor. And we see another very vulnerable moment for Loki where he tells his dad, like, I wanted to do this for you, for all of us. Like, he wanted to prove himself just like Thor wanted to.
Yeah.
He just did it in his own way.
In his way.
And he was doing it in a very manipulative and tricky way, but he honestly, we find out that he actually did have the same goal as Thor. He just did it in his own, using his own abilities and skills, and he held on to that a lot longer than Thor. And it's kind of sad because in some ways you wonder, like, what would have happened if Odin had made the choice to treat his sons more equally, if he had showed Loki a little bit more favoritism on some level, if he would have given Loki the same opportunity, and Loki would have been better prepared to take it like Thor was. We don't know. Obviously Loki has his own agency, and like he didn't have to make the choices he did,
for sure,
but I definitely think Odin's choices impacted Loki's ability to have a better sense of his own agency.
Or even just if we go back to like telling him who he is and what Odin's plan for him was, you know, if Loki had had the opportunity to recognize that he had the same potential as Thor, because Odin saw the same potential within both of them. Loki didn't recognize that he had that same potential. He felt the need to take Thor's.
Yes.
It's an interesting comparison to God and his plan for each of us, because we don't know what that plan is, right? And so it's kind of interesting to think about how your comment that Thor knowing his plan really limits his agency, because there's one thing that he's allowed to do and know and become. Like, that's it. He's king, period. Whereas Loki kind of has this world open to him. He could go around and do anything. He's really talented. He's really intelligent. He's a prince. Like, we can imagine that he has all sorts of doors open to him. But then Thor, it's presented in like Loki has all of this agency, and he uses it to make poor decisions. And Thor has this limited agency and it makes poor decisions, but ultimately makes a decision that leads him to matching that potential. So it's almost like, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say. It's like presented as when I started saying like, oh yeah, if Odin had told him the plan, he would have been able to make better decisions. And as I'm connecting that like to God in my head, I'm thinking, oh, but God doesn't tell us the plan. So like, what is there that I'm missing, you know? And it's the fact that that's Satan's plan, is for all of us to know how it ends and to just like
I would argue though God does tell us how it can end. He just doesn't tell us how we get there. And so I think for Loki, knowing that he could, like, his potential is to be
I would
king
connect
of
it more to
world.
the potential. Yes. That's where I was going with it. Like, it's the recognition of potential ultimately, like, rather than like knowing the end result. If Loki had known that he had the same potential, and so but all of us are able to know that we have that same potential. So in this moment when Loki is saying, I was going to do it for you, Odin says, no, that's not what I want, and Loki lets go, basically commits suicide, which unsuccessfully. That's actually where that scripture comes back, where I was talking about God preserving people in order to be able to do their will in Mosiah 2:21. I thought that it was interesting that like Loki's life is spared, and he comes back, and like we've said a couple of times, like he has the opportunity over and over again to make the right decision. You know, he's preserved and he's given more chances. That's so sad. Because then when he finally does do the right thing, he stops being preserved. Then his time is up. But that's the good thing, right? It is a good thing. Like, he had long enough to change. Like, figure out what he actually wanted out of life. Yeah. That's what it's true. All of us can only hope for. And for our loved ones, is that like we all come to repent and make the right decision before our day is up. And that you have the amount of time it will take for you to take that opportunity. And if you never do, you never do. But if you do, like, great. Yeah, you did it. That's all you need. Like, it's to make that choice to choose the right. Yes. Choose God's path. In the end, we end up just seeing, you know, Loki's left, and Thor he's a different person now. He has a different perspective now than he did before on life, and he has some more clear values, I would say. Maybe not different values, but just the values are clearer, and he's
kind of chosen the ones that mean the most to him. And so he's in a much better place, but he even says, I still have much to learn, which I think goes into showing how much he's changed.
Yes,
first of all,
that's what really tells
he
us.
Never would have said that at the beginning of the movie, ever, that he still has much to learn.
He knew it was right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, he didn't need anybody to tell him anything. He's grown a lot from that, and then he has learned to value his relationships in a new way as well, which we see continue to grow throughout the rest of the films as well. After he says, I have much to learn, his father's response is, you've already made me proud. And I really, really love that too. Like, his father giving him that moment of, like, his father knows his son's not perfect still. He knows he does have a lot to learn, but he's like, that's not the point. Like, you make me proud because you're willing to learn and you're willing to make those changes and become a better person. And that's all I wanted from you, is that show of humility and a willingness to listen and come to understand things better. Just to end, I want to read a scripture from the Book of Mormon. It's in Helaman chapter 14, verses 29 through 30. It says, and this to the intent that whosoever will believe might be saved, and that whosoever will not believe, a righteous judgment might come upon them. And also, if they are condemned, they bring upon themselves their own condemnation. And now remember, my brethren, that whosoever perisheth, perisheth unto himself, and whosoever doeth iniquity, doeth it unto himself. For behold, ye are free. Ye are permitted to act for yourselves. For behold, God hath given unto you a knowledge, and he hath made you free. I wasn't going to, but I'll read 31 too, because I think it wraps it up even better. So we'll continue with that. He hath given unto you that ye might know good from evil, and he hath given unto you that ye might choose life or death. And ye can do good, and be restored unto that which is good, or have that which is good restored unto you. Or you can do evil and have that which is evil restored unto you. I love that it mentions we've been blessed with the ability to know right from wrong. We all have that ability, and our agency is given to us so we can choose what we're going to value. If we're going to value things that are good, or if we're going to value and choose to act on things that are bad and will lead us into destruction and harm, and our loved ones as well. And I think valuing and respecting our own agency and the agency of others is such a central part of God's plan for us, and something we really need to learn to do better, especially in a world where we all want to force each other to believe the same thing as we do and to think the same way we do. That was never God's intention. His intention has always been to allow us to choose what we believe, how we act, what decisions we make, so that we can learn to become something greater, not just do it for points or anything like that, but to actively become more like him. And that is such a blessing. Great. All right. That wraps us up. So if you are new here, welcome. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and you're on YouTube, please subscribe. Or if you're listening to the podcast as well, leave a like if you're watching on YouTube, or a 5-star review, preferably if you're on a Spotify or any other podcast channels. Also, follow us on Instagram at God in All Things Podcast, where we post information about upcoming episodes. If there's any hiccups, we post on there too, and then just fun things as well. And you can check out what I'm reading on my channel, Good Strong Words, on YouTube. I just talk about all my books over there, and Kariana periodically turns up in those videos as well. So thank you for watching. Keep remembering to see God in all things, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.